Hi, everybody. Adrian Fontes here. Did you know that the Democrats of Greater Tucson has a website, thedgt.org, and if you subscribe, it's only 20 bucks. You can support this great weekly communication where folks get together. Sometimes there's candidates, sometimes folks like me pop on to help understand what's going on in the world. The Democrats of Greater Tucson, thedgt.org. Join up today.
We have a wonderful guest speaker today, Mike Weingarten. Mike is the first vice chair of LD 21 Democrats. He's spearheading the 10,000 Voters Outreach Project to increase voter turnout. The project targets left-leaning voters with inconsistent voting records. Learn how the project works, what resources it takes, and how to implement this innovative solution in your LD or other voting district. A data expert, Mike Weingarten, led the same project to success in 2022. This Canvas-oriented project uses a three-touch model to increase the voter turnout of a target population of left-leaning voters with inconsistent voting records. And Mike, I'll let you take it from there.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity. Given the outstanding presentations that you all host week in, week out, it's kind of an honor to be here. So really appreciate it, and good to talk to you all. Joe, you handled a lot of what I was going to say as just sort of like the introduction, the 10,000 Voters project. I guess I did want to give credit to Jackie Bauer, who was our chair of the Democrats in LD 21 in 2022. And a lot of the design of this project was really her thoughts and her initiative. And it really worked out well in 2022. And we are just reapplying most of that design now this year, and it's underway as we speak. Let me see. I think what I'd like to do is really walk through the background and the motivation of why we're doing this project and the approach that we're using. And I think you will find that for those of you who are already familiar with Canvas outreach projects, we're not talking rocket science here. There are a few things that might be a little bit of a twist from your traditional Canvas projects, but a lot of it's going to look familiar. What I do want to do is maybe take a little extra time talking about measurement and how we measure the impact of voter outreach projects in general, and how we're doing it with this one. And I also want to spend a little time emphasizing the messaging that we are giving to our volunteers. This particular project is dealing with maybe a little more challenging target group. And we want to make sure that the volunteers are A, prepared, not surprised, but B, understand how their actions really are contributing to results that I think we're getting. So that'll be a little bit of an extra emphasis. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screens if that's okay.
You're all set to go.
Okay. All right. What I'm actually doing is in part using the training slides that we used when we did a training session for our volunteers at the front end. A good portion of the beginning of it was just giving background on the project and what we're trying to do, and it lends itself well to what we're doing here. So welcome, everybody. Talking a little bit about the environment that we're finding ourselves in. Nobody's surprised about this slide. We are definitely a swing state, and definitely what happens here does have national implications. This is a map coming out of Sabato's Crystal Ball website. It comes from the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia. It's a nice representation of what the current polling is showing. And I've been following this, kind of checking in on it since July of last year. And back then, there were 4 yellow states that were toss-ups. Arizona was one of those. And this has evolved and mutated, as time has gone on. but Arizona has consistently been a toss-up state in every version of this model as it's gone on. Okay, I'm going to try to talk about our LD, our Legislative District 21, and give you a little bit of a profile. The map there that looks like an improbable dragon-shaped image there is our LD. That's Legislative District 21. It starts at Broadway Boulevard. Can you see my cursor moving?
Yep.
Okay. So this section right here is Broadway Boulevard. It goes from Campbell Avenue to about Pantano Wash. And then it just works its way down all the way to the Mexican border, including Nogales, 3 counties, Pima, Santa Cruz, and Cochise. And we're dealing with Nogales here. We're dealing with Bisbee over here. This is probably a really excellent example of what we talk about when we use the term gerrymander, because at least in our view, what the commission, when they did the redistricting, were trying to do was get as many Democrats packed into this district as possible. And so they made this improbable shape to try to incorporate those areas of strong Democratic leaning voters. And this is what we wind up with. So as a result, our district really is nicely Democratic leaning. Our state reps and our state senator won in 2022 by about a 65-35% margin. And so there is strength there for the Democratic candidates. However, the bad news here is that historically the voter turnout has not been strong amongst the Democrats in this district. And therein lies the issue that we're going to be trying to deal with this project, is trying to, we feel like that is the signal that we are losing lots of potential votes for our Democratic candidates by the disinterest and the disengagement of many of the Democrat-leaning voters who are just not turning out the way they should. So in terms of our organization, the LD21 Democrats is a relatively small organization. We don't have a lot of volunteers, and we are extremely dispersed, as you can imagine from the geography that's shown here. So we really can't do anything other than Zoom meetings and occasional visits where we try to converge on one spot to help with canvases. As we did this past Saturday, we were down in Nogales canvassing with the folks in Nogales. But it makes it hard to work as an organization and really come together that way. We also have many, we do have some veterans from 2022, some good veteran canvassers, but we also have many first-time canvassers and people who don't have a whole lot of experience with this. And that's part of what we need to consider as we do this project. Another aspect of the environment, and this doesn't surprise anybody either, if you think back to 2020 when we were a swing state in a presidential election, as you got closer to election day, we did receive lots of attention. TV, radio, social media were going pretty much bonkers. There were lots of calls coming from outside of the area, people in solid blue states and solid red states or around the country. When they wanted to know what they could do to help, they were told, well, why don't you call into a swing state and call voters in swing states? And so they did. And especially the people that we are talking to in this project, we're identifying them as people that need to be talked to. Well, people all over the country are using similar lists. And so the folks that we are going to be talking to in particular are going to get a deluge. And so the premises of what we're doing here is that we really feel like if we start now building some relationships with these target voters, we are going to be able to get some credibility, and we will be able to maybe get their attention in ways that all these other people who will be trying to talk to them near the end of the campaign won't. We hope to be able to cut through the campaign noise at that point. Okay, so the Purpose of the project is to turn out Democratic-friendly voters who may not vote otherwise without encouragement. Our target group is made up of these three subgroupings. We first, and I think everybody here, we were talking about the van before. I'm assuming that people know what the van is. It's the computer system that the Democrats use nationwide to keep track of voter information in these campaigns. We use it heavily here. So we are, first of all, taking in our target group, those voters who are registered as Democrats, but they have a turnout score of between 40% and 70%. Now, the van has results of a lot of modeling that goes on within the DNC, where they take different groups of voters and they typify them in different ways with their modeling. And one of the results of that are some of these scores. You think of this as a probability that they're assessing that these particular voters have between a 40 and a 70% chance of showing up and voting in 2024 right now. Similarly, we are including registered independents who we believe are Democrat leaning, and they have turnout scores between 40 and 70% as well. And to those, we add in newly registered Democratic voters, people who have registered as Dems since 2020. So they were not eligible to vote in 2020. If they registered before the midterms in 2022, we take them into our target group only if they did not vote in 2022. So that is what has made up our target group. If I had to describe it in one sentence, I would say there are people who we think are Democrat leaning, but they have not developed a voting habit, either because they're new or because they've proven that they haven't developed a voting habit just with their historical voting behaviors. I will say that in 2022, the number of voters across LD21 that met these criteria, we were using similar criteria back then, the number of voters was about 10,000, and hence the name of the project. Here in 2024, the number of people who meet this criteria is about 13,000. So you can call this the 13,000 voter project if you wish. The 10,000 voter project has become kind of a brand name within LD21. It was considered a positive, successful in 2022, and we're just kind of using the brand name. And it really doesn't matter when you get right down to it how many of those target voters there are. It's the same principle. So we want to make sure that our volunteers understand what they're dealing with when they talk to people from this target group. By virtue of the way we've chosen these folks, we are frequently talking to people who do not like necessarily talking about politics. They don't, that's not top of their mind when they think about what they're going to do today. And it's not something that they necessarily like. And so it alters the dynamics on the doorstep, and people need to be prepared for that. What it does mean, though, is that these folks can be encouraged to vote, and but they really need to be made aware. In some cases, we're putting this election on their personal radar screen for the first time, in spite of all the news that's out there, and the education and the guidance that we can provide them really will make a difference. A, if they're going to vote at all, and B, if they do vote, are they going to vote up and down the ballot? The voter guides that I think we're all in the process of producing, we will be using those too. I think will be a real help with these folks. We know from past experience, from past projects, that when we talk to folks like this, we're going to wind up with some percentage higher voter turnout as a result of that. I'm saying somewhere between 5 and 10%. That's kind of coming off of some of this work that we've done in the past. But clearly in a state like Arizona and the situation that we're in right now, small percentages of gains really could mean the world. This is a breakdown of the people who have fallen into our target group. You can kind of see the age and gender and party makeup. A couple of points I want to make. This tends to be a younger crowd than a lot of other target groups that I've dealt with in the past. We've got slightly over 50%, half of them are under the age of 35. And almost 75% are under the age of 50. So that's one, and it kind of makes sense because the less reliable voters we've always heard are the younger voters. And I think that's playing out here as we've developed this target group. We also have almost a third of our people as registered independents, and we feel that that is an important group that we are talking to. We said that we were trying to get people who were friendly to the Democrats, and this is the distribution of the Democratic support score. Again, the probability, if you will, from the modeling that the voter will support a Democratic candidate over a Republican candidate in the next election. About 94% of the people in our target group have a support score of 70% or higher. So by the models, this should be a pretty friendly group. Our methodology. Okay, first thing to understand is that we consider this a very neighborhood-centric project, which means that when we get a volunteer, we're going to cut a turf for them of target voters in their neighborhood, or as close to their neighborhood as we can make it. This has a few advantages. One is, especially if you're going to be going back to these folks multiple times, just from a logistical standpoint, it really helps that these people are in their neighborhood. And it also helps with the comfort level for the volunteer, that they're dealing with neighbors. It feels a little less like a cold call when you knock on the door. And from the standpoint of the voter, it is also comforting in a way. The credibility goes up when they know that this is somebody from down the street or the next block over. They listen, and I think we are able to really communicate with that person more effectively when they know that this is a neighbor talking to them. This is what we hope will carry the day when we are trying to get their attention in October. Joe mentioned the 3 touches. When we talk about a touch, we're talking about some form of communication. We're hoping that these touches, and we are trying to talk to these folks at least 3 times between the start of the project and election day. We hope that the touches can be a conversation on the doorstep. That's the most effective way to communicate. But if the person's not home, we leave a flyer. We leave maybe a personal note on the flyer. That is a touch. That is some form of communication with the voter. There are times where our volunteers may follow up with the voter as needed, as appropriate by phone or maybe in writing. But all of these are ways of touching, letting the voter know that we're interested in them, that we are here, that there's advocacy for our candidates. We have the 3 general areas in which we have kind of themes. The first touch, the theme was really just an introductory conversation. I'm your neighbor. I'll probably be coming back. Do you know where you need to be voting? Those kinds of things. And then just asking them about the issues that are important to them and listening, giving them a chance to talk. That has happened in virtually all of our turfs now. That was happening in primarily June. Now we are just getting underway with touch 2, and that is what we term the distinguishing phase, in which we are now talking about values and policy statements and policy directions between the 2 parties, and really trying to get the person to maybe map what their values are into where the 2 parties are coming from on things like reproductive rights and voting rights and the economy and so on and so forth. And then in October, as the ballots start getting mailed out, that's when we go back to them for a 3rd time and really work on getting their commitment to vote, working with them on what their vote plan will be, distributing the voting guides, so that they have structure up and down the ballot and on the propositions as to how to vote. And that will be a very important final touch. We have flyers that support these themes that we carry with us in each one of these. They're bilingual. That's important in our particular district, especially. So whatever you have on one side in English, the identical content is on the other side in Spanish. We often use those flyers to add personal notes. Mentioned the formal training that we did for the volunteers on the front end. We've also had debrief sessions. They've been voluntary, but they've been pretty well attended, where after we get a little experience with the contacts in the field under our belts, we come back together and the volunteers can talk about their experiences, any questions, and it really has been a helpful process to work that with our volunteers. We have a data team within LD21. There are 4 of us, and we provide the data support for the volunteers as this goes on. So we basically have our volunteers divided up amongst the 4 of us, and each of us works with our volunteers to get them their turfs, make sure that any questions get answered. If there are questions about how to record the results or use of minivan or whatever it is, we are there for the volunteers. And that's been really effective. All results on the voter contacts and attempted contacts go back into the van. And that is a very, very important component, I believe, of any of these projects to make sure that that data is being collected, because that data becomes important as when you are in your next election, trying to figure out who your target voter is going to be then. One other thing which is not on here, we did it almost as an afterthought in 2022, but I like it, and I think we're going to try to do this maybe a little more routinely this time. After the election is over, and we get the full list of who voted in the election, we went back to the voters in our turf, and we thanked them. We thanked them for being a voter. Sometimes we did that, by a letter or a postcard. I did it in person. I knocked on doors, and I can't tell you how energizing it was and reinforcing that when I would thank the person, the light that came on their face and the pride of someone who maybe never really thought of themselves as being a voter before was being called a voter. So I honestly think that is a really important thing to do that basically feeds forward to where we want to be in future elections with these folks. Okay. Measurement. We are following 2 different metrics. One is the number of those target voters that we are able to touch. And the second is looking at the actual voter turnout after the election. And the key here, what we try to do is we look at the people that we have talked to or that we've had contact with, that we have touched, and compare their voter turnout to others in the same target voter population who we did not touch, and see what kind of a difference is there were. And I've got the numbers for 2022, and I'd like to share those now. In 2022, we were able to cover 15% of our target voters. We had 10,000 voters, that small organization. We were able to touch maybe 1,500 voters. So therein is obviously an area of improvement for us, and it's something that you basically address by building your volunteer base. And we're not there yet, as you'll see, but that was the one measure. When it came to voter turnout, I want to be really clear. My background in my old days was as a statistician, and I want to be really clear that what I am comparing in terms of numbers here are not really valid statistical comparisons. We were not able to run a statistical design experiment. You can't control in a real life canvassing campaign situation. You can't control for all the variables and do your job. At least I don't know how to do that right now. So what we did was the best we could do of comparing the people that we interacted with and the people we didn't. So the first way we did that is we took all the perfs that our volunteers completed. So we know that there was contact with those voters. And we looked at the voter turnout of just that subset of voters. And that was 41.8% in 2022. It's not a stellar number, but remember, this was a midterm, and remember who we are canvassing here. These are people who are chosen because they are likely not to vote. So 41.8% of the people that we talked to in those turfs voted. Then we took all the people not in turfs that had been assigned to volunteers in those same precincts where those completed turfs were, and looked at their voter turnout, and that was 32.4%. Again, I can't sit here and tell you that that 9% difference was something that we caused with our canvassing. I suspect we caused some of that, but we just don't have the metrics to really fine tune a real estimate there. The second measure was we took all of LD 21, the target voters across the entire LD, across all turfs, all precincts, and we looked at just the voters that we had actually been able to contact, to have a conversation with, to know them well enough that we were able to answer survey questions about them. They voted at a 52.5% rate. We looked at all the voters that were in our turfs, and we attempted to contact, and we were unable to contact them. They were not home, but we left literature or whatever. 37.5% voter turnout, pretty big difference. And then we looked at all the target voters that never got assigned to a volunteer, and there were a lot of those. And their voter turnout was 35.7%. Again, I can't tell you that these are statistically significant differences, but I will tell you that directionally, they are important indicators. And maybe the most important thing to tell you is that going back to my days in LD10, where we did lots of these kinds of projects, and we attempted to measure in almost all of them, there are probably 15 major projects going back to 2019 that I've been involved in, and I've been doing these kinds of statistics after each one. And never once have I found one of our projects to have the numbers reversed from what you would expect. They always are showing that the people we talk to vote at a higher rate than the people that we tried to talk to and left messages for, and who in turn voted at a higher rate than the people that we were not able to talk to, but were our best guesses to similar populations to what we were talking to. So 15-0 is a pretty good record, in terms of directionally what we're finding. I have to believe that tells us that there is a true effect in terms of what we're doing. And whatever that effect is, that's resulting in more Democratic votes. Okay. This is where we are today. We're only at 8%. We've got a higher number of target voters now, but we're only at 8%. We still have new volunteers that are coming in. We've got about 25 right now, so we're covering about 1,000, a little over 1,000 target voters, and we've completed the first of the 3 touches. I have to tell you that given our size, I'm actually pretty proud of the fact that we've got 25 volunteers. That's pretty good. I'm also really, really impressed with the volunteers we have and their level of motivation. They joined us in May when the dynamics, actually April and May, when the dynamics of this campaign were really different than what we're feeling right now. And they were motivated then. I have to tell you that they're pretty pumped right now. There is a noticeable excitement and sense of mission with our volunteers now. Touch 2 is about ready to start. I will say that with Touch 1, we picked up much more negative responses than we were expecting. And we were expecting some level of voters being disengaged and disinterested. But the level of people that were disinterested, disengaged, and I would say disillusioned was higher than we were expecting. It was like our first read on the voters before all the stuff happened in June and July. But it made total sense to us that I guess this is really where the country is. It's going to be really interesting to see in touch two whether we start picking up a difference. Our first canvassers went out over this weekend, so I really don't have any data to share, even testimonial data, but I expect that will be coming pretty shortly. I'm getting close to the end here, and then we can open it up for discussion. There are a couple of limitations to what we're doing that I want to just kind of put on the table. One is when you do the 3 touches, that means that you're getting fewer total voters canvassed than if you had just basically not gone back multiple times to those same voters and tried to get as many voters as you could with just a single contact with your volunteers. And that is true. That is definitely true. And I struggle with this sometimes, but I feel that we're dealing with quality versus quantity in a way. In terms of the quality of the contacts, I think this is a tough crowd. I think that the quality of the contacts may be more important with these folks. And the 3 touches, I think, are meaningful to really know that you are being able to convince more of these target voters to vote. We are expecting to do parallel collaboration with the coordinated campaign as the coordinated campaign ramps up in LD21. We did that in 2022 also. And it was extremely successful. We actually partnered with Mission for Arizona and LD20, and we canvassed on weekends in many of the South Tucson precincts along the dividing line between LD20 and 21. We hope to do something like that again. And then when we get into October, we expect to transition to more of a traditional GOTV. We're encouraging all our volunteers to take an all hands on deck approach when we get to that point. So we've got a little bit of a hybrid going on here. And then the other point I wanted to bring out, when you talk about neighborhood centric, that means your turfs are where your volunteers are. And unless your volunteers are evenly distributed across your LD, which they are not, then you are going to be having some areas that are just going to be left behind. And that is a concern of mine. But fortunately, we have some non-LD21 volunteers, people who want to volunteer with us, but they don't live in LD21. And we are giving them more traditional turfs of our target voters in the areas that are not getting covered otherwise. So again, we're sort of getting a little bit of a hybrid experience there. Okay, last slide. And I want to close with this. This is the messaging that we want to make sure that our volunteers come away with as they prepare for going out and knocking on doors. First of all, sometimes you might canvass a voter and you have a really good conversation on the doorstep, and you pretty much know how that voter is going to vote, and it's kind of a feel good. I'd say the majority of the people on our target list here are people that kind of keep their cards close to their vest. Again, they don't like talking about this stuff necessarily. They may not have really matured their thinking in their own heads yet about how they feel about the election. But it's hard to get into the level of conversations that you would like to get into. And so it's easy for the volunteer to have that kind of a low emotion contact with someone. They go inside, they listen politely, they take the literature, they go inside, and you wonder whether you're wasting your time. The message is you're not. You're not wasting your time. We know from all the statistics that we have collected on past projects that there are some people, some percentage of the people you've talked to that are going to be moved in the direction of voting as a result of your contact. It's just that you don't get the feedback from them, and you never know who. You never know which one or which ones you have moved. but you have moved somebody, is what I'm saying. You have multiple touches on this project, but you also are doing this not in a vacuum. You may, these people are also getting called by Mission for Coordinated Campaign. And it may be that they get a call shortly after you visited, and the two touches in combination do the trick. The key is that you don't have to sway everybody. It's the small percentages that really matter right now with us. And think about it. If you have a turf of 30 people and you're able to convince just one of those people to vote when they wouldn't have otherwise, that's 3%. It's 3% of your little turf. You do two, that's 6%. So take that, multiply it times all the number of people that are doing this in LD21, multiply that times all the people who across the state are doing their own canvases, which have similar kinds of effects. And now you're starting to talk about contributing to something that really moves the needle. So the message to the volunteers are, you need to kind of go on faith here, know that the numbers are backing you up. I put it as, you need to recognize success even when you don't see it, because you just have to know that that's what's happening. And that is it. I was not keeping track of the time, so I apologize if I've gone over, but I'm going to stop sharing here, and then happy to answer questions or talk about whatever.
Yeah. Lillian, you have a question.
Back on one of your earlier charts where you had category 1 and category 2, I didn't understand the difference. But before you answer, let me say this is wonderful. I wish we'd known about this in January. We ought to be doing this statewide. That I think there's so many people who don't know enough and need to know more in order to vote intelligently.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. There are all these trade-offs, and I know the coordinated campaign has measurements of the number of people they're trying to reach, and this may not be the most efficient way to reach the most number of people, but I believe that for the target group that we're dealing with, this is definitely a good thing to be doing. So I guess that's how I would respond to that. To your other question, I'm not sure. Was this when we were talking about how we measured the effects of the project?
Yes, you had category 1 and then you had category 2, and
Okay.
I didn't understand the difference between the two categories.
Go back and share my screen again. Let's see.
I also think that when you influence one person, they may influence other people. They have friends and family that they may bring along.
Very, very, very definitely. We believe that's very true as well. Let me see here. Here we go. This is the slide, I think.
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, let me talk this. What we were trying to do in all of these is to try to figure out when you want to know, did I make a difference or not? We're trying to look at the voter turnout. If somebody voted, that's a difference that you made in the context of this project. And I'm assuming that high probability that that's another vote for the Democrats. So what you're looking at is, are the people that we talked with voting at a higher percentage than the same kind of people, same target group who you were not able to talk to? So in number 1 here, realized that we only had a limited number of volunteers, and we had precincts broken up. Some precincts had a turf here and a turf there, and then the rest of the precinct was not covered by our volunteers. So that was the dividing line that we used. So we looked at the voters that were in the turfs that our volunteers completed, and they basically contacted these voters, and they're the ones that voted at a 41.8% turnout rate. And then we looked at the other parts of the precinct that wasn't covered by any of our volunteers, and their turnout rate was only 32%, 32.4. So that was sort of our attempt at saying, okay, what's the difference between talking to them and not talking to them? Again, it's not a perfectly statistically comparison, but it's about the best that we can do at this point. And then the second one, but did that part make sense in terms of?
Oh, I already understood that. I just didn't
Oh.
understand the difference between 1 and 2.
There were just two different ways, you know, it was like two different attempts at coming up with comparisons that might show us something. So, you know, the same people are being used in the calculations in both of these. It's just like one way is just looking sort of like turfs and not turfs within a precinct. And the other one is looking across all of LD 21 and just totaling up all the people that we were able to talk to, all the people that we just left lit for, and all the other people in the target group that we were not able to touch at all. So it was just like two different ways of trying to get at some sort of an answer.
Thank
Does
you.
that help?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, James Stevenson has a question.
Yes, thank you. First, Mike, thank you for a terrific presentation, and I've heard this discussed in the context of LD 17 as well, so now I have to get a better idea what's going on. Are you talking much about actual just registering with people to vote when you have these, or I guess these are all already registered voters, aren't they? So
Correct.
okay, all right. I've had this is not really strictly relevant to your presentation, but maybe you can shed some light. I've been concerned seeing this article about the Supreme Court decision about the different modes of registration, whether you registered on a federal form or whether you registered through the state. And I talked to the the recorder here in Pima County, and what they said was, with our on-demand voting system, they look at how the person registered, and so the ballot that a person will receive will depend on whether they registered on a state or federal form. In other words, somebody who registered on the federal form is not even going to see state offices, propositions, any of that. Is that a significant problem, or am I making a mountain out of a molehill, that there really aren't that many people registering on a federal form that are going to find that they can't vote on state issues and candidates?
I'm not a good one to answer that, but I would be interested in the answer in terms of, you know, like what percentage of our voters are voting only on the federal form. But I do know that there's a difference in the federal law and the state law. So, you know, the federal law says you don't have to necessarily provide the same levels of proof when you register to vote in the federal election. So I think you're describing that accurately in terms of people that do the federal form not being allowed to vote on the state elections. I don't know how many people that is. I don't know if anybody else here does.
I am going to try and follow it up with a couple other people, but I thought since we had you, I would throw it out there to see if you had any insight into it. But thanks. Thank you very much for
Okay.
being here.
You're
George,
welcome.
do we have any questions in the chat room?
Yeah, we have a comment from Miguel Karras. I don't know. I'm sorry if I messed your name up. Says, "Hi, Mike, I miss you." And then we have another comment.
I miss Gail too. I miss Gail too. we were close collaborators in LD 10, as was Larry Wagner, who's now in LD 17. So there's a lot of the same conversations. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. And John Yoakum.
Yeah.
80% or more are early ballot voters, and then their ballot drops in October the 9th. The question is how does this affect your October calendar?
That's a good question. We obviously want to try to get to the people in our target group as soon as possible in October. So we'll probably be starting as the ballots are starting to get mailed out. But you know, the beauty of what we're doing, and we typically use Minivan as the kind of the phone app that helps us manage the canvassing process as we go through the voters out in the field. Minivan will tell us when the person has voted. So and here we're less about needing to convince the voters to vote Democrat versus Republican, as we are just trying to encourage them to get out to vote. Again, by virtue of the way we've targeted this, it's not like we have to get to them before they fill out the ballot to make sure that they're, that we have our last word in to encourage them to vote for the Democrats. There may be one or two folks like that, that will come up that we will want to do that with, but it's really getting them to the polls that is the key thing. So if I start canvassing the second week of October and I find 3 or 4 people on my turf have already voted, hey, that's success. And now I focus my attention on the folks who haven't voted yet, have not turned their ballots in. I don't know if that answered the question or not, but.
Okay, George, any other questions or statements? Okay, Lillian, you have a question.
Yes, everybody here has heard this from me before. It really irritates the heck out of me that in the over 30 years I've lived in Tucson, I've only gotten political literature dropped at my place one time, and I'm a registered voter. I hear all this nonsense about you can't do apartments, you can't do condos for this, that, and the other, which are mainly nonsense. But I would think a fair number of your target people are in condos or are in apartments. Are you able to find volunteers to do it? Because I will tell you, it is much easier. I live in a complex of over 200 apartments. It is far easier to cover 200 apartments than it is to cover 200 houses. Much less walking, much less work.
I agree with you as long as you can get into the apartments. So sometimes you don't really have access to the apartments, and then you run into problems. But yeah, if you can get into, if there's open access to the apartments, then you can have a pretty dense population that you can reach fairly easily. And yeah, we do those. One thing which we are planning on doing though, for areas in which the volunteer has gone to an apartment building and it's not been accessible, or just individual houses that are inaccessible and you really can't get to knock on the door. The gates are locked, or there's a dog in the yard, and we tell people do not take risks with that sort of thing. Just mark the house inaccessible. We are expecting to have an opportunity near the end of the probably in October, to pull off all the voters that had been attempted and marked inaccessible because they were locked out for some reason, and then do a phone bank with them, so that we're going to try to reach them by phone as best we can. And sometimes you don't have their phone numbers in Van, but to the extent that we do, we would try to call them. So there's going to be a mix there in our project.
It's very, very rare that apartments are not accessible. In Tucson, it's hard to find any that are actually locked, gated. Most of them are open, and people are home on Saturdays, so that's the best time to go.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I don't see no soliciting sign. I see no soliciting signs on individual homes, not on apartments.
Okay.
I think some of the resistance is a myth.
Okay, Susie Anderson has a question.
Mike, thank you very much for being here. That was wonderful. It excited me no end that you send out thank you notes. I mean, I'm old. That's what I was trained to do, is when you receive a positive response, you say thank you. Do you know, have you any statistical evidence that improves the number of people that go to the polls?
No, I don't. I would like to try to develop that. We really didn't do enough of them. As I said, it was kind of an afterthought in 2022. We didn't do enough of them to really be able to generate a lot of statistics. But I would like to try to do that this time, and it will be interesting to see, in 2026, how many of the people that were on our target list as vulnerable to not voting are still considered that way versus not on our target list anymore. So that would be a very interesting thing to see.
Okay, Barathan has a question.
Hi, everyone. Hey, this is more of a comment than a question, really. I've had the privilege of watching Mike and his work in MD10 over the years, and I just want to share one completely subjective personal story with regarding to contacting people in a project of this sort. My wife and I have been doing this, completed the first touch, and like Mike suggested, we've been staying in our neighborhood. And what was really cool was one of the doors that we touched in the first week that we started this year's project was a house that the person in the house actually knew us. And so she opened the door. And that does make a difference because in the past, in prior projects of this sort, we had actually been to that house, knocked on the door, talked to the person, and made friends with her, so that when we went and knocked on the door, she actually opened the door and had a conversation with us. And it turned out that she was a very enthusiastic voter. And so we felt very good about it. The other one that we've done is there's an apartment complex near my house and in our neighborhood where there are very clear signs that say no trespassing, you can't come in at all. And so we decided not to go in there, but we had 3 apartments to contact. So what Leslie and I did was just an innovation, and we decided that it's a touch too. We wrote them a letter and mailed it. We talked to them about who we are, that we live in the neighborhood, that we'd love to make friends with them. And this is what we are doing, and we will contact them again by mail. Now, if it turns out that they actually vote, what we plan to do is to send them a thank you letter. That way, in 2028, when we go back to talk to them, they might be available to us in forms other than our knocking on doors. So this whole process of just staying in a neighborhood, making these 3, and personally, I think of it as a minimum of 3 touches, not just 3 touches. Just doing that, I think, makes a very big difference to people. One more story, sorry, if I can just take a minute. After the convention, after Kamala Harris announced that after we knew that she was going to be the candidate, a friend of mine who hardly ever votes and who's not really on the list this time, I was walking down the road with my dog. He sees me from a distance, comes charging over and says, "How wonderful." And that makes all the difference to you as a volunteer when you want to go out and talk to people, to realize that other people feel the same way you do. So there's this whole idea of three touches, keeping in touch with the people in your neighborhood. Start by talking about baseball, for instance. Who cares? Make friends with them. I think is a very significant difference, because the role of politics is to persuade, not just to ask people to vote. And that, I think, is what this thing aims for as a sort of undercurrent.
Yep.
I'll stop.
Okay. Okay, George, any other questions in the chat?
I think I see Lucy messing. She just put up a I don't know if she waved the hand, but she's something happened on her
I'm
screen.
good. I was just giving you a thumbs up.
Ah. Thanks.
Shirley, Muty,
Yep.
wrote, even if a neighborhood is posted no soliciting, likely by the HOA, they might allow voter information.
Okay. Well, hey, make some program notes. Mike has done.
They must be allowed to get voter information. That's Arizona law.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah, good clarification. Way to go, Shirley.
And then we have one more
Okay.
comment by Ms. Fox. She says, I also live on the east side. I've looked for apartments twice. I came across one complex that was a gated on one that had a gate, but it was not gated.
Hey everybody, it's Senator Mark Kelly. As all of you know, Arizona Democrats have had a lot of important wins over the last few years. We won 2 U.S. Senate races and we delivered Arizona's electoral votes to President Biden and Vice President Harris. We elected Governor Katie Hobbs, Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, and Attorney General Chris Mays. Now, those elections were close, and our victories mattered. Arizona Democrats from the federal to the local level have delivered real results for our state on critical issues like combating climate change, lowering prescription drug costs, protecting the right to vote, and preventing more restrictions on abortion access. The Democrats of Greater Tucson offers the opportunity to hear from elected officials and candidates about that important work and the issues that matter to them. That information will be invaluable as Arizonans head to the polls. So this election cycle, whether you're signing up to knock doors, make phone calls, or joining the Democrats of Greater Tucson to hear from and speak to Democrats in our area, please know that your voice matters and we need you on this team. Thank you.